Control. We have a possible homicide at Block 17 Okonkwo residence. Female victim. Requesting immediate backup and medical assistance. Over. The dispatch breaks the fragile silence of Oluwokan, a town still stretching awake under the soft glow of a rising sun. The streets, usually calm, seem to hold their breath. Windows stay shuttered. The routine hum of early morning life is absent, replaced by something colder. A patrol car edges through the narrow, familiar lanes. Red and blue lights stutter against faded signboards, briefly illuminating the peeling walls of old shops. A roadside vendor, unaware of the chaos unfolding, moves slowly, his wooden cart creaking under the weight of unsold fruit. Near Block 17, a small crowd has begun to gather. Neighbors speak in hushed tones, their words sharp but quiet. Their eyes, however, say more. Fear, curiosity, a grim knowingness. In towns like Oluwokun, news doesn't travel, it erupts. In the middle of this growing circle of whispers stands a modest apartment complex. Nothing about it suggests tragedy, yet, inside one of its cramped units, the life of a young woman has been snatched away with brutal finality. Her name is Amaka Okonkwo, final-year student at Adunla University, known for her bright smile, her relentless energy, her kindness. This morning, her lifeless body lies sprawled on a cold floor, once a home, now a crime scene. Officers move with practiced urgency. One tapes off the entrance, another photographs the scene. A few steps away, a man stands rigid, eyes downcast. His white NYSC shirt is crumpled, stained by sweat and sleepless nights. His name is Toby Adeyemi. Not long ago, he arrived in this town carrying ambitions bigger than its borders. Today, he's the prime suspect in a murder that has shaken the community. The whispers grow louder. Words like betrayal and pregnancy thread through the air, weaving a narrative of love soured by fear and rejection. The relationship between Toby and Amaka, once envied by many, had deteriorated in the shadows. Accusations, denials, silent threats. Now it has reached its bleak conclusion. As Toby is led away, his face remains impassive, but his clenched fists betray the storm within. Regret, anger, fear, only he knows. Oluwokan watches, frozen. This is no longer just a story of two lovers. It has become a reflection of deeper wounds, personal failures amplified by societal expectations. In a place where appearances are everything, the consequences of hidden truths have finally burst into the open. In the distance, the wail of an approaching ambulance cuts through the thickening tension. But it's too late. For Amaka, for Toby, and for the fragile dreams they once shared. Toby Adeyemi arrived in Oluwokan with a restless energy only a fresh graduate could carry. Fresh out of university, he wore his NYSC khaki with quiet pride, not just as a uniform, but as a badge of transition from youthful dreams to adult responsibilities. For Toby, this was supposed to be a stepping stone, a year to prove himself, to gather momentum for the life he had always envisioned. He had grown up in Ibadan, a sprawling city where ambitions were easy to claim but difficult to realize. His parents, civil servants of modest means, had raised him with the belief that hard work and a clean reputation could carve paths through the toughest terrain. Toby believed them. He had to. When the NYSC posting letter assigned him to Oluwokan, a town most city dwellers barely knew existed, Toby was underwhelmed but undeterred. The brochures described Oluwokan as a peaceful settlement, nestled among hills and rivers. Reality was simpler. A few main roads lined with weather-beaten shops, a central market alive with negotiation, and clusters of homes that looked nearly identical in their faded charm. Yet, there was something comforting in its simplicity. Life here moved with a certain rhythm. Traders opened their stalls without the chaos of the cities. Children played football with makeshift goalposts. Elders gathered beneath old trees, their conversations filled with a mixture of gossip and generational wisdom. Toby was posted to the administrative office of Adunla University, a relatively young institution gaining traction for its focus on grassroots development. His role was far from glamorous. Record-keeping, student inquiries, occasional errands, but it was stable. For a young man mapping his future, stability was a good enough start. In his early weeks, Toby kept his head down. He navigated the unfamiliar social landscape with measured steps, balancing work, mandatory NYSC activities, and his private ambitions. He envisioned saving enough to kickstart a small enterprise once his service year ended, perhaps a logistics startup or a consultancy for small businesses. For now, he was content gathering experience and staying away from unnecessary distractions. But Oluwokun had its own way of pulling people into its fold. The town's smallness meant everyone noticed everyone. Toby's polite demeanor and quiet focus soon caught the attention of both colleagues and locals. Conversations at the university cafeteria grew from mere pleasantries to discussions about life, ambitions, and occasionally, subtle proddings about when he would settle down. It was during one such casual conversation that his path crossed with Amaka Okonkwo. She was hard to miss. A final-year sociology student, Amaka had a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She challenged professors in lectures, organized student outreach programs, and yet was just as comfortable sharing quiet laughs with friends at roadside food stalls. Where Toby measured his words, Amaka spoke with clarity and conviction. Their first meeting was unremarkable. A chance encounter near the university's registry office where misplaced documents sparked a brief exchange. Yet, that small interaction planted a seed. Over time, through group projects and campus events, they found themselves orbiting closer. Amaka's charm wasn't in grand gestures. It was in her curiosity, how she asked questions and actually listened, how she made Toby feel like his quiet aspirations were worth hearing. For a young man used to managing his emotions behind a composed exterior, Amaka's candidness was both disarming and refreshing. Evenings spent beneath open skies, sharing cups of locally brewed cocoa became their quiet ritual. Conversations meandered from academic frustrations to dreams far beyond Oluwokun's modest borders. In Amaka, Toby found a reflection of his own ambitions, but unshackled by hesitation. For a while, life felt aligned. NYSC duties filled his days. Moments with Amaka filled his evenings. The weight of expectation, ever present, seemed manageable with her beside him. But even in this chapter of contentment, undercurrents of tension existed. Small-town life had its unspoken rules. Public image mattered. Relationships, especially those leading to complications, were scrutinized heavily. While Toby found solace in his growing bond with Amaka, he couldn't ignore the quiet reminders of what was expected of him back home. For now, though, those concerns were distant. In Oluwokun, beneath the simple veneer of daily life, Toby allowed himself to believe that this perhaps could be the start of something good. If Oluwokun had a heart, many would say it beat through people like Amaka Okonkwo. A final-year sociology student at Adunle University, Amaka was known not just for her academic brilliance, but for her ability to make people feel seen. She was the kind of person who remembered the names of cafeteria staff, who volunteered for community cleanups without waiting for applause, and who never hesitated to stand up for what she believed was right. To her classmates, she was both ally and challenger, encouraging yet unafraid to call out complacency. Lecturers admired her sharp mind, even when her pointed questions disrupted the flow of their lessons. For Amaka, learning was never about memorizing facts. It was about understanding people, systems, and the small, often overlooked choices that shape society. But beneath the confidence was someone deeply aware of her limitations. Coming from a modest background, Amaka understood the stakes of her education. Her family had sacrificed much to get her this far. Every distinction earned, every leadership role taken, was not just personal triumph. It was a brick laid towards a better future for those who had invested their hopes in her. When she first met Toby, it wasn't love at first sight. It was curiosity. Here was a young man who, unlike most NYSC Corps members eager to escape their postings, carried himself with a quiet determination. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but when he spoke, it was measured, thoughtful. Their initial interactions were brief. Administrative formalities, shared acquaintances, casual greetings. But Amaka noticed things others didn't. How Toby stayed back after work to double-check records, how he deflected compliments with a shy smile, how his eyes betrayed a deeper hunger for success even when his words were guarded. For Toby, Amaka's attention was unexpected. He wasn't used to someone so direct, so sure of herself, taking genuine interest in his perspectives. At first, he kept his distance, cautious of being misunderstood, but Amaka had a way of disarming formality with simple honesty. One evening after a campus seminar, their paths crossed again. It was Amaka who initiated the conversation, challenging Toby's views on youth unemployment in Nigeria. What started as a polite exchange soon turned into a spirited debate. By the time they parted ways, there was a shared recognition. These weren't just surface-level talks. They had found intellectual equals in each other. From there, the walls began to lower. Their connection grew not through grand romantic gestures, but through consistency. Shared lunches at the campus canteen, late-night study sessions, long walks through town where conversations flowed effortlessly from academic theories to personal dreams. Amaka's openness encouraged Toby to share parts of himself he usually kept hidden. His fears, his aspirations, his complicated relationship with family expectations. For Amaka, Toby represented stability and depth. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply present. In a world where many pursued quick wins and hollow connections, Toby's sincerity was refreshing. Their bond wasn't without its contrasts. Amaka was outspoken, Toby reserved. She believed in confronting problems head-on. He preferred to reflect quietly before acting. But these differences, at least initially, complemented each other. Where Amaka would push, Toby would temper. Where Toby hesitated, Amaka would encourage. In their private moments, away from the probing eyes of classmates and town gossips, they allowed themselves to dream. Of careers beyond the borders of Oluwokan, of partnerships built on mutual respect, of a life where love and ambition could coexist without compromise. Yet, even as their relationship deepened, subtle signs of friction began to appear. Toby's cautiousness wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Back home, the unspoken rules were clear. Focus on career first, personal commitments later. His family, though proud of his achievements, expected him to follow a traditional path, marry at the right time, to the right person, when financially and socially ready. Amaka, on the other hand, saw love as part of the journey, not a destination to be delayed for convenience. For her, responsibility and affection were intertwined. The idea of compartmentalizing them felt foreign, even dishonest. These differing worldviews, though unspoken, hovered at the edges of their relationship. Still, neither was willing to confront it head-on. The present was comfortable. The future could wait. In those moments, sitting on a bench beneath the sprawling branches of Oluwokun's old trees, sharing roasted corn and laughter, it was easy to believe that their bond could withstand anything. But life, as both would soon learn, had little regard for comfort zones. For a time, it was easy to believe that love would be enough. Toby and Amaka continued to share their small moments, debates over local policies, dreams of escaping small-town limitations, quiet evenings spent trading stories about their childhoods. But beneath the surface, a quiet tension had begun to form. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It crept in during silences that stretched a little too long, in glances that carried questions neither dared to voice. For Toby, the pressure was internal but relentless. Every phone call from home came laced with subtle reminders of the path expected of him. Finish NYSC. Secure a stable job. Build a foundation before even thinking of marriage. To his family, emotions were important, but timing was everything. Jumping ahead of schedule wasn't just frowned upon, It was seen as irresponsible. Amaka, though understanding, struggled to reconcile this cautiousness with her own values. In her world, responsibility wasn't measured by bank balances or social approval. It was about honesty, integrity, and standing by one's commitments. The idea that love should be postponed until it was convenient felt hollow. Conversations that once flowed naturally now stumbled when they veered into the future. What started as harmless what-ifs turned into uncomfortable pauses. One afternoon, as they sat outside a modest cafe, Amaka broached the subject again. "Toby, have you thought about what happens after NYSC? Not just work, but us?" Toby stirred his drink, eyes fixed on the glass. "One step at a time, Amaka. Let's focus on finishing the year strong. There's no need to rush into decisions we're not ready for." The words weren't harsh, but they landed heavy. Amaka said nothing more, but in that moment something fragile shifted between them. Around them, Oluwokan hummed along. Life went on as it always had. Markets bustled, students hurried through assignments, elders continued their quiet surveillance of the younger generation. In a place where community ties were strong, relationships were never truly private. Everyone had an opinion, even if unspoken. Amaka felt it keenly. The sideways glances, the subtle questions masked as friendly curiosity. "You and Toby are always together, my dear. Any plans for a proper introduction?" They came with smiles, but beneath them lay expectation. Toby, for his part, noticed too. He could feel the invisible weight pressing down, tightening with every whispered remark. What had begun as innocent companionship was now being scrutinized through a different lens. He wasn't oblivious to Amaka's hurt. He cared deeply. But the thought of being cornered into a life-altering commitment, one he didn't feel ready for, filled him with quiet dread. His dreams felt too fragile, too unfinished. Rather than confronting these fears, he distanced himself, retreating behind work, behind polite excuses. Each deflection added another crack to the foundation they had so carefully built. Friends noticed. Zainab, Amaka's closest confidant, wasn't shy about voicing her concerns. "Amaka, are you sure he's ready for the kind of future you want? It's not about love. It's about courage. Some people have it. Some don't." Amaka defended him at first. "Toby is thoughtful, not careless. He's just being careful." But even as she said it, doubt had begun to settle. The disconnect wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Two young people caught between modern aspirations and traditional expectations, each navigating that tension differently. Still, neither wanted to be the one to acknowledge how far they had drifted. Love, after all, wasn't supposed to fracture this way, not theirs. As days turned into weeks, what was once a shared journey started feeling like parallel paths, close but never quite intersecting. In hindsight, the signs were clear. But in the thick of it, they were just two young people hoping that time would resolve what conversations couldn't. Do you think fear of societal judgment can silently destroy relationships even when love is genuine? Share your thoughts in the comments. The late evening air in Oluwokan carried a sticky warmth, the kind that clung to the skin and made simple conversations feel heavier. In a modest off-campus apartment, Amaka sat on the edge of her small bed, staring at a plastic stick whose message had changed her life. Two faint pink lines. The world outside continued its quiet routines, oblivious to the storm gathering in this cramped room. For Amaka, this was not just a medical result. It was a declaration, a pivot point from which there was no return. Her fingers trembled, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what this meant for her, for Toby, for both of them. When Toby arrived, his usual composure seemed frayed. He had agreed to meet without asking why, though something in Amaka's voice had told him this wasn't one of their usual evening chats. The apartment, with its simple furnishings and soft yellow lighting, had always been their safe space, a small world carved out from the expectations pressing in from outside. Tonight, however, the air felt different. Heavy. Charged. Amaka didn't waste time. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. She extended the small plastic strip towards him. I'm pregnant, Toby. For a moment, silence filled the room. Not the comfortable kind they often shared, but a cold, suffocating pause. Toby's eyes fixated on the test, his expression unreadable. His mind raced, grasping for explanations for a version of reality where this wasn't happening. No, he said almost to himself. No, this can't be right. Amaka's throat tightened. I took the test twice. It's right. His gaze finally met hers, but instead of the warmth she was accustomed to, there was distance. How? I mean, are you sure it's mine? The words struck harder than any slap. Amaka recoiled, the weight of betrayal sinking in. Toby, I haven't been with anyone else, you know that. He stood up abruptly, pacing the narrow room. His fingers raked through his hair, a nervous habit. Amaka, you don't understand. This wasn't supposed to happen. I can't handle this right now. Her voice rose, sharp with disbelief. What do you mean, handle? This isn't a project you can postpone, Toby. This is life. Our life. But Toby was no longer listening. His thoughts were tangled. Family expectations, societal judgment, the fragile plans he had sketched for his future. A child now felt like a wrecking ball aimed straight at those plans. I never agreed to this, he muttered, more to the walls than to her. I have responsibilities. I can't afford this mistake. Amaka's heart clenched at the word. A mistake? She echoed, her voice breaking. Is that what you think this is? After everything we've shared? His response was a bitter mix of frustration and fear. You think love is enough to fix this? You don't understand the kind of pressure I'm under. My family expects me to come back with success, not scandal. Tears welled in Amaka's eyes, not from helplessness, but from a surge of anger. So now I'm a scandal, Toby? Is that what I am to you? The confrontation hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. For a moment, both of them stood still, caught in the wreckage of their unraveling connection. Toby, unable to face the consequences, did what many do when cornered by fear. He retreated. Without another word, he grabbed his bag and left, leaving Amaka in a silence that roared louder than any argument. In the days that followed, Amaka's attempts to reach him were met with cold indifference. Calls went unanswered. Messages were read but never replied to. Each unanswered attempt was a fresh wound. Oluwokan, ever watchful, began to murmur. Whispers of Amaka's condition seeped into the town's conversations. The girl who had once been a symbol of promise was now the subject of hushed gossip. For Amaka, it was a lonely battle. Zainab remained her anchor, offering words of comfort and pragmatic advice, but even Zainab's patience wore thin. You need to confront him, Amaka. You deserve answers, not this silence. And so, Amaka decided, there would be no more evasion. Toby would face her, not for arguments, not for guilt, but for clarity. The stage was set, a quiet diner on the outskirts of town, neutral ground, a place where they could talk without the suffocating presence of watchful eyes. When Toby arrived, his face told a story of sleepless nights and internal battles. Yet his first instinct was avoidance. He slid into the booth opposite Amaka, eyes darting to the window as if hoping for an escape route. Amaka wasted no time. Toby, look at me. This isn't just about you. This is about us. About the life we created. His lips pressed into a thin line. He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind, but nothing prepared him for the reality of Amaka's gaze. You're trying to trap me, he said quietly, as if saying it softer would make it less cruel. I can't be forced into a life I'm not ready for. The words hung between them, cold and final. Amaka's voice, though trembling, held its ground. I'm not forcing anything, Toby. I'm asking for honesty, for you to own up to what's already real. But Toby had already withdrawn. His fears, magnified by the weight of expectation, had built walls too high for reason to climb. As he stood to leave, Amaka realized that the person walking away from her wasn't the Toby she had fallen for. That version of him, the dreamer, the confidant, the partner, had been overshadowed by someone else entirely. And with that, their fragile future splintered. In Oluwokun, news traveled faster than the morning bell of the town's central church. Facts, half-truths, and outright fabrications often blended into a single version of events. And once that version took hold, it rarely let go. Amaka soon found herself at the center of this attention. It began with the glances. Subtle at first, the kind people give when they think you're not looking. Then came the pointed whispers. Conversations would hush as she passed, only to resume moments later with renewed fervor. Even those who had once praised her for her academic achievements now spoke of her in hushed, judgmental tones. A promising girl, but she let herself get carried away. Why would she trap a corper? Desperation, perhaps. Her poor family, what a shame. For Amaka, each passing comment was another cut. Small but relentless. Though she tried to maintain her routines, attending lectures, volunteering in community programs, the weight of scrutiny grew heavier with each day. Simple errands like buying groceries at the market became exercises in endurance. Every smile felt forced. Every conversation, a minefield. Through it all, Zainab remained her anchor. Zainab had never been one to mince words. Where others offered pity, she offered blunt honesty. People will talk, Amaka, that's what they do, but their opinions won't change your reality. What matters now is how you choose to move forward. Easier said than done. The isolation was suffocating, compounded by Toby's continued silence. His absence was louder than any accusation. But Toby was not untouched by the storm. Though he kept his distance, the whispers reached him too. Every trip to the university office, every walk through town, carried with it a silent chorus of judgment. Colleagues greeted him with forced politeness, their eyes betraying what their mouths wouldn't say. Friends grew scarce, unsure of how to navigate the scandal. Internally, Toby's turmoil deepened. He had convinced himself that avoiding Amaka was the best course, for her, for himself, for the fragile plans he still clung to. Yet the longer he stayed away, the more those plans felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Fear had taken root. Not just fear of responsibility, but fear of becoming a cautionary tale. In a town where personal failures were magnified, Toby felt trapped between his dread of public shame and his inability to face the consequences of his actions. His world grew smaller. Days blurred into each other. Nights were restless, haunted by memories of conversations left unfinished. Regret simmered beneath his defensiveness, but pride held it firmly in place. Amaka, however, refused to let silence be the final word. With Zainab's encouragement, she decided on one last attempt. Not to plead, not to beg, but to confront. Toby needs to face reality, she told Zainab. Not just for me, for himself too. The meeting was arranged carefully. A quiet diner on the outskirts, away from prying eyes. A neutral ground where emotions could be laid bare without interruption. In the days leading up to the meeting, Oluwokun remained abuzz. The narrative had already been written in the court of public opinion. A young woman seeking to trap a man into unwanted obligations. The truth was irrelevant. What mattered was perception. But for Amaka, the truth still held weight. Whether or not the town believed her, Toby would have to look her in the eye and confront what they had created together. For Toby, the prospect of this meeting was a confrontation with his own fears. Every excuse he had built, every justification he had whispered to himself, would now be tested. Neither knew it then, but the upcoming encounter would be the point of no return. The night carried a humid stillness, pressing down on Oluwokun like a blanket too heavy to shake off. In Amaka's small apartment, the ceiling fan spun lazily, pushing warm air in slow circles. The space had always been her sanctuary, cluttered with books, A modest couch draped with a worn Ankara throw, soft light spilling from a table lamp. But tonight it felt like the walls were closing in. When the knock came, it wasn't loud. 3 short raps, hesitant, yet final. Amaka's pulse quickened. She knew who it was. Opening the door, she found Toby standing there, a shadow of the man she had first fallen for. His NYSC shirt hung loosely on his frame, creased and sweat-stained. His eyes, once calm and steady, were bloodshot, darting away from her face as if afraid of what they might find there. "We need to talk," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She stepped aside, letting him in. The door clicked shut, cutting them off from the world outside. For a moment, neither spoke. Toby paced the room, his movements restless, agitated. Amaka watched him, waiting. "I can't do this," he said suddenly, hands gesturing vaguely. "This pregnancy, this situation, it's suffocating me." Amaka folded her arms, steadying herself. "It's not a situation, Toby. It's a life we created." He flinched at the word as if struck. "I'm not ready, Amaka. Don't you get that? I'm not ready to be a father. I'm barely keeping myself together." "Then say that," she replied, voice firm. "Say you're afraid. Say you're overwhelmed. But don't pretend this isn't real. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to yourself." Her words, meant to reach him, only seemed to push him further into himself. "You don't understand," he snapped. "My family, my plans, everything I've worked for. This changes it all. You think they'll accept this? You think I can just tell them I've failed before even starting?" Amaka's patience wavered. "Failed? Is that what you think this is? You're not failing by taking responsibility. You're failing by running away." Toby's breath quickened. The walls seemed to press in tighter. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "I had a plan, a clear path, and now—" His words dissolved into frustration. Amaka took a step closer. "Toby, life doesn't wait for your plans to align. It demands honesty, courage. I'm standing here, not because it's easy, but because it's right." Her nearness, her insistence, was too much. "Stop," he burst out. "Stop making this sound simple. You don't know what it's like to have everyone's expectations on your shoulders." "I know enough," she shot back. "You think I don't feel pressure? You think I don't have a family watching my every move? The difference is, I choose to face it." The words, sharp and direct, struck deep. For a heartbeat, Toby's expression softened. Regret flickered in his eyes. But fear is a powerful thing. His mind, clouded by weeks of internal battles, snapped under the weight of his own denial. The conversation spiraled, words overlapping, accusations replacing dialogue. "You're trying to ruin me," he said, stepping closer, voice rising. "You knew what this would do to me. You knew, and you didn't care." Amaka's eyes narrowed, anger replacing hurt. "No, Toby. You're ruining yourself. You just needed someone else to blame." The distance between them vanished. What began as an argument turned physical, not with intent, but with the clumsy desperation of two people trying to be heard over the noise in their heads. A shove, a grab, words lost in the chaos. Toby's hand shot out, grasping Amaka's arm. His grip, born of frustration rather than premeditation, tightened as emotions surged unchecked. "Let go of me, Toby," Amaka demanded, struggling to pull free. But his fear had taken over. Rational thought gave way to blind reaction. In the suffocating heat of that small room with emotions stretched to their breaking point, Toby's actions crossed a line no apology could mend. The struggle was brief but devastating. His hands, once gentle in moments of affection, now betrayed that history. Pressure, resistance. A final, desperate plea from Amaka, choked off mid-sentence. And then, stillness. In the aftermath, the room seemed impossibly quiet. The hum of the ceiling fan, the distant bark of a stray dog, ordinary sounds, now starkly out of place. Toby stepped back, his chest heaving. The weight of what he had done settled on him slowly like ash after a fire. Amaka's body lay motionless, her life extinguished in a moment of irreversible loss. He staggered, reaching for the wall as if it could support the sudden collapse of his world. Panic surged. He hadn't planned this. He hadn't meant for it to go this far. But intentions were meaningless now. For minutes that felt like hours, he stood frozen, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. When he finally moved, it was mechanical, grabbing his bag, stumbling towards the door, heart pounding louder than his thoughts. Outside, the night remained indifferent. Life in Oluwokun continued, unaware of the tragedy sealed behind those thin apartment walls. But not for long. Morning arrived, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded the night before. In Oluwokun, traders prepared their stalls, students hurried towards lectures, and life, unaware, marched on. But for Zainab Musa, something felt wrong. She hadn't heard from Amaka since the previous evening, a silence that gnawed at her with every passing hour. Messages unanswered, calls ringing endlessly. It wasn't like her. Amaka, no matter how troubled, never retreated into complete isolation. By mid-morning, concern hardened into dread. Zainab made her way towards Amaka's apartment, her steps quickening as her mind played through worst-case scenarios. The path was familiar, lined with small shops and quiet houses, but today it felt foreign. The usual greetings from neighbors passed unnoticed. Arriving at the door, Zainab knocked. Once, twice. No answer. A knot tightened in her stomach. The door, usually bolted at this hour, yielded to her push. The stillness inside was suffocating. "Amaka," she called out, her voice brittle. No response. What she saw next would haunt her forever. Amaka lay motionless on the cold floor, her features peaceful in a way that only deep sleep or death could bring. But there was no breathing, no subtle rise and fall of her chest. Just a devastating stillness. For a moment, Zainab couldn't move, couldn't think. The weight of denial kept her feet planted, as if not approaching would somehow undo what her eyes were witnessing. But reality was unkind. A trembling hand reached for her phone. The emergency number was dialed almost on instinct. The news spread through Oluwokun like wildfire. In a town where life was measured in routine, such a violent rupture was unthinkable. By the time the first patrol car arrived, a small crowd had already gathered. Neighbors stood in clusters, speaking in low voices, their faces a mix of shock and sorrow. The young woman they had seen grow up, admired for her brilliance and kindness, was now the center of a tragedy none could comprehend. Leading the investigation was Inspector Danladi Garba, a man known for his no-nonsense approach. He wasn't swayed by gossip or sentiment. Facts were his currency. He entered the apartment with quiet efficiency, eyes scanning every detail. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, just methodical observation. The apartment told its story in subtle ways. Overturned furniture, a glass shattered near the couch, signs of a struggle, but no forced entry. The evidence pointed to someone Amaka knew. Interviews with neighbors, digital records, and CCTV footage from nearby streets began to form a clear timeline. Toby Adeyemi had been seen entering the building the previous night. He hadn't been seen leaving until hours later. By midday, the town's collective sorrow had shifted into anger. Conversations once filled with sympathy now demanded accountability. He was supposed to protect her, not harm her. All those promises, all those dreams, what were they worth in the end? This is what comes from raising boys who are never taught to take responsibility. In the eyes of the community, Toby's guilt was certain. For Inspector Garba, certainty required proof. Within hours, an alert was issued. Toby's name, once associated with potential and promise, now echoed through police radios as a wanted man. Meanwhile, at the town's bus terminal, Toby sat in a corner, his head down, cap pulled low. The weight of his actions had dulled his senses, but not enough to escape the crushing awareness of what he had done. His attempt to leave Oluwokun was short-lived. A tip from a community member, someone who had noticed his anxious behavior, led officers straight to him. He didn't resist. Whether from guilt or resignation, he allowed himself to be taken. The image of Toby being led away in handcuffs struck the town deeply. For some, it was justice. For others, it was a grim reflection of how far, and how fast, a person could fall. As Amaka's body was taken away, wrapped in a simple white shroud, Zainab stood silently among the crowd. Her friend was gone. Nothing would change that. But as the murmurs of the crowd swirled around her, one thing became clear. Amaka's story would not be forgotten. Do you believe enough is being done to protect young women in our communities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. When Toby Adeyemi was brought into custody, his face told a story words could not. The defiance many expected wasn't there. Neither was open remorse. What remained was a hollow, tired expression of a man who had finally been forced to confront the wreckage of his choices. The interrogation was not a spectacle. Inspector Garba had no interest in theatrics. He focused on facts. Toby's presence at Amaka's apartment was confirmed by multiple sources: digital footprints, eyewitness accounts, and most damning of all, the physical evidence left behind. In the courtroom, the weight of the case was felt long before the proceedings began. Public interest was overwhelming. Journalists filled the benches, their pens poised to capture every word. Advocacy groups had taken up Amaka's cause, turning her story into a wider conversation about gender-based violence and the cultural silence that often shields perpetrators. Amaka's family sat in the front row, their faces carved in grief. Her mother, once so full of quiet pride, now seemed smaller, her eyes fixed not on Toby, but on the empty space her daughter should have filled. The prosecution built its case meticulously. They presented messages exchanged between Amaka and Toby, painting a clear picture of a relationship that had deteriorated under the weight of denial and fear. Witnesses testified to the couple's public confrontations, to Toby's growing frustration, and to the emotional toll on Amaka. Forensic reports detailed the struggle in the apartment: bruises, defensive wounds, signs of a violent altercation that left no room for ambiguity. The defense, thin on arguments, tried to frame the incident as a moment of emotional breakdown, a tragedy, not a premeditated act. But intention was no longer the question. The act itself was undeniable. Throughout the trial, Toby remained largely silent. Occasionally, his gaze would drift towards Amaka's family, but he never held their eyes for long. Whether out of shame or cowardice, no one could tell. In one rare moment when allowed to speak, he managed only a few words. "I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to end like this." But intentions, once again, were irrelevant. The court's deliberation was swift. The weight of evidence left little room for doubt. Toby Adeyemi was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. For the community of Oluwokun, the verdict was a bitter balm. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. But justice could not bring Amaka back. It could not erase the image of a young woman silenced too soon. In the weeks following the trial, Amaka's name continued to resonate. Her story sparked campus dialogues, community forums, and broader national debates. Advocacy groups pushed for stronger protective measures for young women, better support systems, and more comprehensive education on emotional responsibility and healthy relationships. A foundation was established in her memory, aimed at supporting young women navigating the often harsh intersection of ambition, love, and societal expectation. Scholarships, counseling services, and awareness campaigns grew from this initiative, ensuring that Amaka's legacy would be one of impact, not victimhood. For Toby, life behind prison walls became an ongoing confrontation with the consequences of his choices. His dreams of success, of building a name, of making his family proud, all reduced to a cell and the echoes of a life he destroyed. The town of Oluwokun, though scarred, carried forward. But the story of Amaka Okonkwo remained a stark reminder of how fragile life becomes when truth is denied and fear is left unchecked. In the months following the trial, Oluokun settled back into its routines, but something fundamental had shifted. The tragedy of Amaka Okonkwo had pierced through layers of silence long left undisturbed. Conversations that once belonged to whispers in back rooms now echoed in classrooms, town halls, and family gatherings. Her death had become more than a cautionary tale. It was a mirror, forcing the community to confront uncomfortable truths. The narrative was no longer just about a young woman and a man unable to face responsibility. It was about a culture that teaches boys to suppress vulnerability, that burdens young men with the illusion of invincibility, while expecting young women to quietly bear the consequences of failed expectations. From these painful realizations, change began to take root. The Amaka Okonkwo Foundation, started by her family and supported by local NGOs, quickly became a beacon of advocacy. Its mission was clear: empower young women with education, emotional support, and resources to navigate relationships safely and assertively. Workshops on healthy communication, consent, and emotional intelligence became fixtures at Adunla University. Community dialogues were held, where parents, students, and local leaders confronted the societal norms that had indirectly fed into the tragedy. For many, these discussions were eye-opening. Fathers who once believed emotional restraint was a mark of masculinity began to reconsider. Mothers who had taught their daughters to endure in silence questioned the lessons they had passed down. Young men, seeing the consequences of unchecked fear and pride, engaged in conversations about accountability in ways rarely seen before. The foundation also launched scholarship programs, ensuring that no young woman's education would be derailed by the absence of support. Counseling services, once seen as unnecessary luxuries, became accessible to students battling emotional turmoil. Amaka's name, once spoken with sorrow, now symbolized resilience and reform. But the most profound lesson lay not in programs or policies. It was in the simple truth her story revealed: that denial of responsibility, whether out of fear or shame, breeds consequences far beyond personal ruin. That love, when not coupled with honesty and courage, can become a fragile mask for deeper insecurities. Toby's downfall was not born from inherent malice, but from layers of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of confronting his own limitations. But fear left unchecked becomes dangerous. It blinds, it isolates, and eventually, it consumes. His life sentence served as a grim reminder of this. For the younger generation in Oluokun, Amaka's story became a reference point. Teachers spoke of her not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. Her peers, once consumed by gossip, now found themselves questioning the role of societal expectations in shaping destructive behaviors. In quiet moments, those who had known her remembered not just the tragedy, but the vibrancy she had embodied, the debates, the laughter, the relentless pursuit of better. Her legacy was not confined to the four walls of that small apartment. It lived on in every conversation sparked, every life touched by the foundation's work, every young woman who found her voice, and every young man who learned that strength is found not in denial, but in owning one's truth. As Oluokun moved forward, the scars of that dark chapter remained. But so did the hope that her story, as painful as it was, had not been in vain. If you believe stories like Amaka's should spark real change, hit the like button, share this video, and let's keep this conversation alive. Together, we can build safer, more compassionate communities.